This afternoon, we have two great sessions planned for you: regulatory and natural gas production and capture opportunities. Let's get started. The session chairs for this afternoon's regulatory session are Michael Kukuk and Kristen Hamman. Michael is the Government and Regulatory Affairs Manager for Oasis Petroleum and currently serves as the Chairman of the NDPC Regulatory Committee. Michael has been with the Regulatory Committee responsible for all facets of operations compliance for 7 years. Before joining Oasis, Michael worked as a compliance officer for the U.S. Department of Labor for 5 years. Michael has an MA in International Studies and an MA in Environmental Studies from the University of St. Thomas. He has a Juris Doctorate from the University of Houston and is a member of the Houston Bar Association. Kristen Hamman serves as the Director of Regulatory and Public Affairs for the North Dakota Petroleum Council and facilitates the more than 300-member Regulatory Committee at the Council. Prior to joining NDPC, Kristen served on the staff of Senator John Hoeven, earlier for Representative Tom McClintock and Representative Marilyn Musgrave in various capacities. Kristen has a BS in Economics from Brigham Young University and a Master of Public Affairs from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin. Please welcome Michael and Kristen.
Thank you, Carrie, for that introduction. She must have gone backstage. So before I introduce our first speaker, I just want to give a thanks to the Petroleum Council for organizing this event. And I think they're doing a really great job, middle of a pandemic, to be able to put this together, and really impressed with the turnout. So I just want to give a hand to Ron and Carrie for the work they're doing. So our first speaker this afternoon is John Mehlhoff, State Director for the Montana Dakota's Bureau of Land Management. Mr. Mehlhoff has 37 years of experience with the Department of Interior, most of it within the BLM. In John's career, he served as the Associate State Director in Colorado, as a field manager for 17 years in both Colorado and Oklahoma, as program lead for the Assistant Director of Energy and Minerals, as staff assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Land and Minerals, as legislative assistant to a U.S. Senator as part of a congressional fellowship program, and as a petroleum engineer for the Platte River Field Office in Wyoming and at the Montana Dakota State Office. Mr. Mehlhoff returned to the BLM in 2019 from the Office of Natural Resource Revenue, where he served in the Senior Executive Service as a Program Director for Coordination, Enforcement, Evaluation, and Appeals for 5 years. Please help me welcome Mr. John Mehlhoff.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's bright up here. My name is John Mehlhoff, and I am the State Director of the Bureau of Land Management in Montana Dakotas. I serve in Billings, Montana, overseeing the three-state region. It's wonderful to be here in Bismarck with all of you today, and I'm grateful and honored to be asked to speak in front of this group of people. I'm a proud native of the great state of North Dakota and enjoy being back here among family and friends. I grew up on a family farm in McLean County, and my family continues to work in the coal and agriculture industries in this great state. My career has spanned nearly 4 decades working in the Department of the Interior. I've worked in many different states in various capacities during this tenure, and I'm fortunate and blessed to now be serving in the role of State Director. And it gives me a great opportunity in that role to re-engage in activities in this great state of North Dakota. I began my career as a petroleum engineer in the early 80s working for the oil and gas industry, on that side of the industry. And shortly thereafter, I began working for the Bureau of Land Management, and I've held a multitude of jobs since that time. But regardless of every job I've had, I've never strayed far from the oil and gas industry and the other minerals responsibilities of the department. I have seen many administration changes, from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden and many others prior to that. And throughout my career, I have performed my responsibilities, regardless of administration, as effectively as I could possibly do it. Today, I find myself working for President Joe Biden and Secretary Deborah Haaland. For many, it may seem challenging to make transitions like that, and on the face of it, that assumption rings true. The common denominator, though, is the well-defined mission of the Bureau of Land Management. It's embedded in FLPMA, the Federal Land Management Policy Act of 1976. And FLPMA is referred to as the Organic Act of the BLM, and our mission statement finds its genesis there in Section 302. And briefly, what it says is that the Secretary shall manage the public lands and minerals under the principles of multiple use and sustained yield. This morning, we heard both TR and Governor Burgum refer to future generations and our inherent responsibility that goes with that. BLM's mission statement says the very same thing. Over a long career, I've witnessed many of these administrative priority changes and many of the directives that come with that. As expected, they reflect the promises and objectives that brought them into office. My job is to help them execute those priorities while keeping within the laws, rules, and other directives that are all generated under the Organic Act umbrella of multiple use and sustained yield. I remind all of us of these foundations while we look forward to the expectations and realities of the immediate future. My goal today is to help us all better understand the administration's priorities and how we can collectively work together toward that future. Much has been said about investing our time and energy into the eyes ahead, looking forward perspective. We heard a number of speakers this morning speak to that. As you know, the Bureau of Land Management provides the American public the role of stewardship, management, and oversight of our public lands and resources, and we will continue to do that under this umbrella. Most critical, of course, to this audience is the role and function of those responsibilities as it pertains to oil and gas minerals. In BLM, we plan, lease, approve drilling and other permits, bond, conduct enforcement, plug and abandon, communitize, unitize, perform other cradle-to-grave functions for this industry. All of it is governed by carefully constructed rules, regulations, onshore orders, and guidance. These controlling documents have been developed in a collaborative, public-facing, technically oriented, and science-based manner. Many of you have participated with us in the creation and development of many of them. This has long been the practice and will continue to be the practice going forward. We have faced challenges and hurdles in the past, and we will again face them going forward. We have always found smart solutions and innovative technologies that help us solve these problems. It's important for us to know and recognize some of the people that are sitting in important chairs within the administration. I already mentioned Secretary Deborah Haaland, the first Native American woman to hold the presidential cabinet position. The Secretary has acknowledged the importance of the oil and gas industry. She said in her confirmation hearing, and I quote, "Fossil fuels will continue to play a major role in America for years to come," unquote. But she is also very focused on the impacts. Second, I would like to identify Tommy Boudreau. Mr. Boudreau hails from Alaska, and he worked in the Obama administration as the director of BOEM, or the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. He also worked in many other departmental chairs during the Obama administration. He was nominated by the president to serve as the deputy secretary, and his nomination was genuinely bipartisan and friendly. I had the distinct pleasure to serve with Tommy on the Royalty Policy Committee during the Trump administration. Also serving on that committee was our very own Lieutenant Governor Brett Stanford. Next is Laura Daniels Davis. She is serving as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Lands and Minerals. She has challenged us also with the statement that says the federal oil and gas program is not serving the American public well. It is time to take a close look at how we best manage our nation's natural resources with current and future generations in mind. Next, I want to identify Tracy Stone Manning, who the President has nominated to serve as the next Director of the Bureau of Land Management. Ms. Manning has served for both Senator John Tester of Montana and Governor Steve Bullock of Montana, and is currently Senior Advisor to the National Wildlife Federation. She is pending, her nomination is pending, and will be decided going forward. And then finally, I want to identify Nada Wolf-Culver. Nada is the Principal Deputy Director for Policy of the Bureau of Land Management, and she's currently serving with the authority of the Director. Nada most recently worked as Vice President for Public Lands and Senior Policy Counsel at the National Audubon Society. All of these key individuals are currently finding their footing within the department. They're working hard to learn the intricacies of the Bureau of Land Management and other agencies that serve you, and they're striving to effectively implement the directives of the President. If you Google DOI.gov, you will find the stated priorities of the department. They include accelerating renewable energy on public lands and waters, strengthening relationships with tribal nations, creating jobs, focusing on conservation with the goal of 30% of our lands and waters in mind, and recognizing and advancing equity and environmental justice. I want to focus on a couple of these priorities. In North Dakota, the Fort Berthold Reservation and MHA Nation sit squarely in the middle of the Bakken. We continue to provide all leasing, operational, fiduciary responsibilities on all trust lands within this reservation. We have and will continue to work very closely with Chairman Mark Fox and the other tribal leaders to advance the oil and gas objectives of the MHA Nation. There are many challenging and complex situations, but we continue to engage them along with our partners in the North Dakota Industrial Commission, our other federal partners, and others in pursuit of those objectives while achieving job creation with a direct focus on equity and environmental justice. Just for perspective regarding our Native American footprint, the Dickinson Field Office, which Lauren Wickstrom, and he's in the audience, I know. Lauren, if you'd raise your hand so people know where you are. There he is right there. Led by Lauren Wickstrom, our field office in Dickinson, just for perspective, approved 493 drilling permits in fiscal 2019. Nearly half of them, 230, were Indian mineral development on the MHA Nation. So far this year, we have approved 70 Indian APDs and 140 federal drilling permits. It's also important to remember, though, that since the beginning of the Bakken development in 2012, the BLM has authorized more than 5,000 drilling permits during that time frame. Important information from the past. But now it's important for us to focus on going forward as well. Important to all of us are those challenges that lie ahead. Some of them are technical in nature, others will challenge our perspective and intellect. As an engineer, solving technical trouble is always an attraction to me. At the head of that list is AFMIS. In this room, many of you probably already know about the challenges with using that system as we navigate through changing it. On May 21, we make a final transition for the field office to switch over systems. I want to thank you all for helping us solve problems that we have already encountered with that system and ask you for your continued engagement to solve the problems going forward into the future, because I know there will be. Next, I need to talk about leasing. As all of you are aware, we're in the middle of a pause. Many of you have probably looked at the Bureau of Land Management website, and if you have, you will find there a memorandum dated April 30, which is titled Oil and Gas Leasing, Land Use Planning, and Lease Parcel Reviews. If you've not seen it, I ask you to go ahead and look at that BLM.gov website to find it. But when you do, much of what you will find there is familiar. There are a couple of key changes, though, including sale date flexibility within a quarter instead of it being a fixed date, the removal of the 6-month requirement to take a parcel from the expression of interest stage to the lease offer stage. It also implements both 30-day comment and 30-day protest periods as part of that instruction memorandum to the field offices. In addition to our leasing challenges, we also have a number of new rulemakings in front of us. They include revising our fossil fuel regulations to update fees, rents, royalties, and bonding requirements. These, of course, are found in the regulations in Part 3100 and 3400 for those reg geeks out there. The primary purpose of this rulemaking is to update BLM's rules governing venting and flaring of natural gas and from onshore federal and Indian oil and gas leases. Also underway is a proposed rulemaking on rights-of-way, leasing, and operations for renewable energy and transmission. Those regs are found at 2800, 2880, and 3200. This rule will advise regulations for rights-of-ways, leasing, and operations related to all activities associated with renewable energy and the transmission lines needed and necessary to move that energy. Finally, I want to identify that we have updated guidance on our orphan and idle well program. This was actually done in the Trump administration back in December. This ensures that all of our field offices regularly review all non-operational wells and take appropriate steps to reduce the federal idle well inventory and thus reduce the American taxpayer liability. In this guidance, an orphan well is defined as a well that no longer has a responsible or liable party and does not have sufficient bond coverage for the plugging and surface reclamation. I want to take a moment here and acknowledge the great work of Lynn Helms and the North Dakota Industrial Commission. And you heard Governor Burgum reference this morning as well. They used CARES Act funding, and we partnered with them last year to plug and abandon more than 40 of those wells. Some were converted to injection, many were plugged, but that takes a big liability footprint off the North Dakota map, and we're grateful for it. In the news recently, you've heard the president talk about his vision for how we can all work together to collaboratively conserve and restore lands, waters, and wildlife that support and sustain the nation as the America the Beautiful initiative. The BLM will be identifying next steps to support the commitment to this national conservation goal, including through policies of our own and through our own initiatives. We will work together with the department towards a decade-long effort to support locally led and voluntary conservation and restoration efforts across public, private, and tribal lands and waters in order to create jobs and strengthen the economy, tackle the climate and the nature crisis, and address inequitable access to the outdoors. The report identifies the key principles that will guide our conservation efforts, many of them directly relating to our mission and ongoing work. They include pursuing a collaborative and inclusive approach to conservation, conserving America's lands and waters for the benefit of all people, supporting locally led and locally designed conservation efforts, honoring tribal sovereignty and supporting the priorities of tribal nations, pursuing conservation and restoration approaches that create jobs and support healthy communities, honoring private property rights and supporting the voluntary stewardship efforts of private land owners, using science as a guide, and building on the existing tools and strategies with an emphasis on flexibility and adaptive approaches. The last important update I want to give all of you is that we're working on the North Dakota Resource Management Plan. This is a very important piece of work within the Bureau of Land Management because it sets the framework for how we will manage the lands and mineral estate in North Dakota for the next 20-year period. The North Dakota RMP will provide management direction of approximately 58,500 surface acres in the state, but most importantly, 4.1 million acres of BLM-administered federal minerals. This does not include any tribal trust minerals. That's just the federal footprint. The RMP will update goals, objectives, and management actions and allocations as well as provide a current analysis of the changed conditions. The purpose of the RMP is to provide a single comprehensive land use plan guide that will manage the BLM-administered lands and minerals in the state. The RMP is needed to address changes in conditions and competing resource uses and values in North Dakota. Since 1998, which is the last RMP and the one we currently work under, many things have changed, including the socioeconomic, ecological, institutional, regulatory, and policy changes that have moved since that time. Specifically, there is a need to update the RMP in light of the development of the Bakken Formation. The impacts from the Bakken development were not analyzed in 1988, and we need to have that analysis included. We also need to include an updated air quality and additional mineral evaluations, including coal screens and analysis that go with it. Public scoping on that project ended in August of 2020, and since that time we've been working on the coal screening, comment analysis, and alternatives development. Pending guidance on the alternatives presented to the department review team, the draft EIS is tentatively scheduled for a November 21 rollout, and a final EIS RMP is scheduled for April of 2022. This will start the governor's consistency review and the public protest period, and the record of decision is scheduled for July of 2022. In closing, I would be remiss if I were not to talk about the relationship that the Bureau of Land Management has with the North Dakota Petroleum Council. Since 2011, BLM has met regularly with NDPC on issues facing both the industry and the government. This tight relationship has fostered a mutual understanding of each other's business. BLM has held several workshops to help industry maneuver through the government's processes in order to reduce timeframes, workloads, and ultimately provide a better product. Today we meet quarterly, and we continue to share a productive and decades-old relationship. As you can expect, we will see some changes in policy and regulation ahead. As an industry, you can also work with us to respond to those challenges. Amazing achievements have been accomplished to address challenges in the Bakken. This industry has invested in the solutions to the problems and risen to the expectations of the communities in which we live and work. More must be done to combat the concerns of climate change and the impacts of fossil fuel development. The oil and gas industry must be smarter, cleaner, and more responsive and more responsible. I look forward to working with you in the upcoming months on many projects and initiatives I've expressed here today, and I again want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak and the attention you have shared with me on all of these important topics. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. I would be remiss. I have about 1 million questions for you, but I'll just ask one in the interest of time. I wanted to know a little bit about Secretarial Order 3395, which is kind of rescinds some authority from from the field offices back to Washington. Has that had an impact on your processes and operations, and what are you hearing from operators about that?
Yeah, he's going to get me fired today. It's his goal and objective. 3395 remember in my comments where I said the department's trying to get its footing, right? And all of the important people serving in those chairs. Well, that's true. You don't come into those jobs knowing exactly how this whole thing works and how the Bureau has administered our roles and responsibilities. Remember, it's not just oil and gas. We got dozens of other resource priorities and objectives that we work on. But in this regard, 3395 was an opportunity for the administration to learn more about what we do, how we do it, and to get better footing about that. Going forward, we have had most of our authority restored. There is a new memorandum that came out that requires us to push more information up. It's all in a capacity of them learning and understanding what our role and function is. Sometimes they are in disagreement, sometimes they're not. Every APD, every other document that we forwarded up under 3395 has since been returned, and the authority for us to approve them has since been accomplished, and Lauren and his team have approved dozens of permits and extensions and other activities that occur. 3395, I would like to leave with the thought that it's catch my footing document.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, John. And he mentioned the quarterly meetings that BLM has with our NDPC Regulatory Committee, and I just want to reiterate our gratefulness for that and think it's very productive for us to have an open conversation so that everyone can be on the same page, so appreciate that. So our next speaker is Dave Glatt. Governor Burgum appointed Dave Glatt as Director of the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality in May of 2019. The DEQ is responsible for protecting North Dakota's air, land, and water resources. The department implements protective programs and standards to help maintain and improve environmental quality. Glatt brings more than 35 years of experience in environmental protection to his role as Director of the DEQ, 17 years as Chief of the Environmental Health Section of the North Dakota Department of Health, where he served in various capacities. So please join me in welcoming Dave Glatt.
Well, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here today. I was just thinking about a little story, true story. I walked into a bar. That part's not true, but the other part is. I walked into the bar, and a friend of mine saw me, and he says, "I thought you were dead." I said, "What, dead?" And he said, "I looked in the alumni magazine, and under the deceased column, they had your name in there." So I didn't think much of it, and then a week later, I called home, and I was talking to my dad, and they said, "Funny story, I showed up in the alumni magazine, and they had me listed as dead." And Dad said, "Well, I kind of probably had something to do with that." And I said, "What'd you do?" And in Dad's way, and he said, "Well, the Alumni Association called the house, and they asked for you, and I said, 'You're no longer with us.'" So words have meanings, and I think Dad did that on purpose. Well, what I wanted to talk to you today about is a little bit our perspective on environmental protection as the DEQ in the state of North Dakota. It's talking about today, navigating the regulatory environment, and that can be pretty complex and confusing and sometimes not too consistent. We believe that for really effective regulatory compliance, regulations, implementation, it has to include the federal government, state government, local governments. It has to include industry. They have to be a part of this, and it has to include the citizens. If any one of those are kind of out of whack, we end up in court, and things just don't get done right. So what I want to talk to you today about is who are we, or who we are, depending how you want to look at it, as a state regulatory agency and what our philosophy is moving forward. I want to talk a little bit about the federal government, the challenges that we see moving forward as the go-between between the federal government, industry, and the citizens of the state. I want to talk a little bit about two programs that we have coming up. One that you may want to pay attention to is called the Regional Haze Program, which is taking on a different type of flavor moving forward than what it was originally intended. And finally, talk about a carbon-constrained future, which I will tell you that when I start talking about that, that gets people nervous. Regulator from North Dakota talking about carbon-constrained future, I get some weird looks. So I want to talk about that really briefly. Well, who are we? We are the primary environmental protection regulatory program or agency within the state of North Dakota. We have primacy agreements from the Environmental Protection Agency, where we can directly implement the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, RCRA, and a couple other acts that go along with that. It is our intention to maintain the quality of the environment or improve it where we have an opportunity. We also want to protect public health. And when I talked about we're all in this together, we truly mean that. It takes all of us to protect public health and to maintain and improve environmental quality, and I think we can do that. We also believe in following science and the law. That is foundational. The law defines the boundaries from which we can work in. The science gives us the path to follow. And if we follow that, and we follow that doctrine, it takes the agenda issues out. If you have good science, good data, you make good decisions. They're not always easy, and they're sometimes challenging, but that's what we're about, following science and the law. And believe it or not, we're not about enforcement. We're about compliance. We want compliance. And I get the sense that the vast majority in the industry want compliance as well. They don't want the black marks on the industry. And that vast majority of the people we have worked with on a day-to-day basis are looking for solutions and looking at ways of how we can cooperate together. We do that with outreach, getting out boots on the ground. I firmly believe that you can't regulate from behind a computer screen. You have to get out there, and I apologize for my language. I have told people that before you really know what hog shit smells like, you gotta step in it. So I got staff out there stepping in it all the time. You gotta understand what a flare is, what a PRV. You have to understand the challenges that are going out in the field. And you only get that by interacting with the people in the field. Also, outreach is important for the public. The internet can run wild, and it's amazing how much misinformation is out on the internet. It's a never-ending challenge for us to get the right information out. To tell the truth, put all your cards on the table. There are challenges, but they are solvable, and if we work together. Communication. We have to be available. One of the things that we live by is that we are accessible as an agency, we're transparent in our decision-making, and we're responsive. When we talk about communication, it's about having an open-door policy and open ears, listening to what the challenges are, not always having the right answer. We also talk about cooperation. Again, like I said before, this doesn't all happen. We have fairly good compliance rates out in the oil patch. Why does that happen? Because industry understands that they're in it for the long haul. It isn't just for today. And that we must look at how do we cooperate, how do we find solutions to some of these very troubling and very challenging problems that we face on a day-to-day basis. And last and not least is that we do enforcement, only as a last resort. We see as an agency enforcement as failure. Failure on the state's part, that we didn't engage enough with industry, that we didn't explain the rationale of why we need to do certain things. And it's also a failure on industry's part. We can find the right way, but there are times when enforcement has to be part of it. Another thing we look at is the federal pendulum and state consistency. I've been around long enough that that pendulum swings back and forth. And every agency or new administration that comes in, not one of them, actually I will say all of them, have said, we're here, the last 4 years have been terrible, we're here to save the day and things are gonna change. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, I've heard that from both sides. That pendulum swings back and forth. The only consistent part in all of this has been the states. We walk down the middle of the road. We get run over once in a while. But we're down the middle of the road and we try to be consistent and navigate the different agendas and different policies that come up from a day-to-day basis or year-to-year administration. When I start, it leads me into the new federal regulations and the new federal philosophy. I will tell you that the last 4 years, and love Trump, hate Trump, whatever you want to do, but the last 4 years we were left alone. That doesn't mean the environment went to hell. That means we were left alone. And we took care of that working with industry, and the data shows that. The new administration has come out saying climate change is real. We better get going right away. I was asked in the Senate subcommittee in DC from a senator, he said, do I believe in climate change, yes or no? And I said, Senator, yes and no. I believe there is climate change, I just don't know what your definition is. Is the world going to end in 10 years? I can't tell you that. I don't buy into that. But I know that there's an issue here that people believe that we need to move forward. So from our perspective, from the administration's end of it, climate change and impacts are real. You can see that through executive orders that have come down the pike, talking about the social cost of NOx, SOx, and CO2, using various models. Kind of an aside, my belief of models is that all models are wrong. Some are useful. I am concerned when they start developing models and talk about social cost, is that whose social cost and how is that number going to be defined? They're looking at an all-government approach, 50% reduction of CO2 by 2030. So they're really sending the messages out there that things are going to change. That's the intent. From the state regulatory end of it, we haven't seen the actual moving on it yet, but we're waiting for things to start to take hold. One of the other areas is environmental justice. Now, I believe in environmental justice. Nobody should be put upon environmentally to the point where their health is impacted in an adverse way. Everybody should have a seat at the table to comment and have input on what we do as a society environmentally. My concern is that they have not defined it. There's no boundaries on this. It can mean anything to anybody at any time. I am concerned that a good idea can turn out just like NEPA has turned out. Good idea, but it's, excuse the term, weaponized in some cases to where everything's paralyzed and nothing gets done. Talked to a commissioner in Louisiana who said environmental justice was brought up on a project. They were protesting and all that kind of stuff. He said the people protesting were not from the community. Is that really environmental justice? I think we need to develop a plan where everybody can be at the table and everybody can have a part of the process. But I am concerned that if used in the wrong way, it could result in the stalling of very important projects and us actually moving backwards. One of the projects that we are dealing with now or putting together is called the Regional Haze Program. And what that is that they want to get back to natural visibility by 2064 in our Class 1 areas. It's not a health-based issue, it's about visibility, what you can see out on the horizon. We're in our second planning period. The first planning period, we looked at what were the emissions from the coal-fired power plants, and we did evaluations, did engineering calculations, and came up with what were the appropriate controls for those facilities so we could see an improvement in visibility moving forward. That was done 2015 time frame. Those controls were put into place, and from the graph you can see that baseline around 2005, we want to get down to natural background in 2064, and they call that the glide path. The first time we went around, we just looked at the glide path and there's a lot of things out there that we can't control, international sources outside of North Dakota that impact visibility. So then they adjusted the glide path. That adjustment in the glide path resulted in us being pretty significantly below the glide path and then be in compliance. We also looked at those sources in North Dakota that we can control. And what we found out is that coal is not the issue anymore. The bigger contributor at this point is oil and gas. But because we're at below the glide path, we've seen some good progress, and we also know that the markets are changing at a very rapid pace. We're thinking that maybe the best approach at this point in time is sit and waiting to see how things turn out. Not sitting on our hands, because we know that flaring is being reduced. We're doing better on gas capture. There are good things happening out there. But maybe we should sit and watch this for the next couple years to see how it plays out. I will tell you that the environmental groups are saying, no, you can't do that. Even though you meet your glide path, you're doing better, you need to do more. We're not of the same philosophy. So what we plan to do, moving forward, before I go forward on that, is this is kind of a table showing the various sources, and 13% of those things that we can control that impact visibility, of those, we're seeing that oil and gas is at that 9%. And that's a little bit misleading in the fact that it's a very diffuse source. It's over a large landmass, so it doesn't impact the Class 1 areas all at the same time, although that percentage looks kind of high. We will be taking a look at that as we move forward. And what we found out, our takeaways from that, is that, North Dakota sources and sector categories contribute to a relatively small portion of the total light extinction in North Dakota Class 1 areas. We knew that. Really, there's not a whole lot of impact from North Dakota sources. There are some things we can do. The largest sector, oil and gas category, consisting of point sources, tribal oil and gas operations, and all those type of things, because they're spread out over a large area, really we're questioning how much of an impact they really do have on the Class 1 areas. Like I said before, the electric generation utilities are really contributing a very small amount when compared to oil and gas. And then lastly, 13% of the total light extinction at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, that is from North Dakota sources. So we could probably wipe out all the emission sources that we have, and we would not see a major impact change in the Class 1 areas. So why do I bring all that up? We are developing a report, and we'll be looking for comments, and we'll be looking for your comments. That draft report should be coming out in end of June, sometime in July, laying out our philosophy or our plan for the next several years to be implemented by 2028. Take a look at it. Because I can tell you already that we're getting comments on it saying, do more. Do more with coal, do more with gas, do more with agriculture, do more. And so you need to be prepared. We need to protect the environment. We need to show improvement, and we can do that. But we don't need to just irresponsibly throw money at something that we don't know will change or make anything better. So I ask you to be involved, take a look at it, comment if you feel the need. But it's a regional haze program that's coming up in June. Another area is a carbon-constrained future. You have to have lived in a cave if you're not aware of what's going on here. That's a lexicon that's happening all over the place. Almost kicked my son out of the house because he wanted to talk about evils of fossil fuel. He's a younger guy. I think I convinced him that he was wrong because he wouldn't be eating at our dinner table in the future if he did change his mind. So he rethought things and he said, Dad, I'm with you. So, but a carbon-constrained future. North Dakota has a great story to tell. Geology, we're set in a good position. We're doing great things on carbon capture at our coal facilities, renewable resources. All of that is a great story to tell, but it's fragmented. It's not in a cohesive, one type of plan saying, this is North Dakota. all hands on deck. We have large agricultural places where we can start looking at carbon capture, taking advantage of agriculture, building soil health, which has water quality improvement benefits, has production benefits, and it has carbon capture benefits. Why can't we be part of that as a state? In my skewed vision of the world, I like us to see North Dakota have a carbon bank to where we could be a clearinghouse for carbon credits that are generated from agricultural end of it. And we can tell industry, come to North Dakota. We got the carbon credits, you can be carbon neutral. I believe we can be carbon neutral, if not carbon negative, moving forward. Has to be science-based, has to have good carbon-based accounting practices, but I think we need to get a comprehensive plan moving forward. With that, when I gave my song and dance to the legislature, and that comes under the heading of no good deed goes unpunished, is that they put that intent in our budget bill. Is they asked us to put together a carbon plan, a carbon intensity plan, which basically looks at what are we currently doing in North Dakota, what are some of the possibilities moving forward in North Dakota, and what maybe can we do moving forward. That's an all hands on deck. Haven't really formulated how we're going to do that yet, but I kind of envision, really roughly, say we had various work groups. We'd have a coal work group, we have an oil and gas work group, we have an agricultural work group, looking at what are some of the things we can do to reduce our carbon footprint, but promote the industries. I think that's possible. So stay tuned on that. We will be reaching out to folks on that as we move forward, looking for your input, because there are some great things going on out there that aren't being noticed. So with that, I thank you for your time. I rambled a little bit. I'm good at doing that. But feel free to give us a call at any time. If you got ideas on carbon capture or how to reduce our carbon footprint, man, we're all ears. Because I think working together, we can really make this happen, and I'd like to be part of that as North Dakota moving forward. So thank you for your time.
Well, some interesting stuff there, Dave. Thank you. You talked a bit about the carbon-constrained future, and we heard the governor make kind of a big splash this morning with a 2030 goal of carbon neutrality. He also, though, talked about innovation, not regulation. So as one of the top regulators in the state, how do you see your role fitting into implementing a lot of the governor's goals and initiatives?
Well, first of all, I will argue with you. I'm not the top regulator. I am a regulator, because there's some other regulators that I don't care about. But it's really sitting down with industry. We have regulations out there right now that we want to protect public health, we want to protect the environment, and we need to be mindful that we have to comply with those. Can we, working together with industry, look at innovation? I will tell you, we've looked at things such as how do we get 99% efficient flares in the past? Got some pushback from the federal government. Our role is to say, no, this works, allowing industry to move forward. That improves the environment, reduces our carbon footprint. That is a good way to move forward. So our role is to promote the environment, protection of public health, work with industry to make sure that we find the right solutions that cover all the bases. And I think we can do that without being a top regulator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Dave. We're going to switch gears a bit from the regulator, or one of the top regulators, to the regulated community. Our next speaker is the president of the Western Energy Alliance. Kathleen Sgamma engages in public affairs, federal legislative, public lands, environmental, and regulatory issues on behalf of oil and natural gas exploration and production companies in North Dakota and across the American West. Kathleen has testified before several congressional committees on energy and environment topics and is regularly quoted on Western issues in national and international media, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the BBC, Fox News, NPR, Washington Post, and the National Journal. Prior to joining the Alliance in 2006, she spent 11 years in the information technology sector, including establishing the European consulting practice and a German subsidiary for a software company. And she also spent 3 years as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. I want to thank Kathleen for her service in the Army. I'd also like to add that if you're not a member of the WEA, it's worth it for her emails alone. She often has some very insightful commentary that I like to share with colleagues. But with that, I'd like to welcome Kathleen up to the podium. Thank you.
Thanks for reading those, Michael. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate working with NDPC. And I just really appreciate that Michael is trying to mix it up between Dave and Lynn Helms. I really, I want to see who's top regulator in North Dakota. I really appreciate, like I said, I appreciate being here. Western Energy Alliance, that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk mostly about the Biden ban on leasing and some of the issues behind that, and what we're doing as a trade association, working with NDPC, Petroleum Association Wyoming, API, and others, to reduce some of that regulatory risk and kind of give an outlook on where I see things going. So Western Energy Alliance has been around since 1974. We provide a regional perspective to Washington, D.C., and although we're based in Denver, do not blame me for anything going on in Colorado. I focus specifically on federal issues, and I know John is really excited about that. We promote environmentally responsible development, as I know you all do, and we're all focused on that as an industry. So we're proud of our industry, and we cover all the western states there, and because of that, our differentiation is that we provide that perspective to DC, but we are the tip of the spear on public lands issues because obviously the West is predominated by public lands. So, like I said, I'm going to talk about the Biden ban on leasing. It was done shortly after Keystone. It was done in week 2, and it was characterized as a pause on leasing in order to do a comprehensive review of the entire oil and gas program. So that looks like it's a longer term ban than just a pause. So that's why we call it a ban. I see it easily taking up most of the first term, most of the Biden term. And I don't see how you look at the entire oil and gas program, because if you read that little section of the executive order, talking about a comprehensive review of the entire program, including all impacts of climate change, that is, sounds like to me some type of programmatic environmental impact statement, and it sounds like that's going to take years, because I don't know if there's been an oil and gas environmental impact statement done in less than 4 years for I don't know how long. So we saw that on day 7 actually, and when you really look at it, well, that was coupled with the day 1 secretarial order, which Michael mentioned earlier, and that relates to a 60-day pause. And I agree with you, John. When you look at a new administration coming in, it does make sense for them to pause a little bit and look at things and get their feet on the ground. And so I wasn't as worried about that as this longer term ban that the president signed a week later. I think what we've seen, and generally what we hear from our members, is that 60-day pause has been lifted. It is, permits are being approved. Nada Culver, the BLM director for policy, was before the Senate recently, and she said 500 permits have been approved system-wide since the start of the Biden administration. So it seems like things are rolling on. But I am concerned when the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals, Laura Daniels Davis, says that headquarters is now looking at questioning any APD extension. APD extensions were fairly routine, right? You'd get an APD for 2 years. If you needed another 2 years, they were pretty much routinely granted. Now it seems like there's more scrutiny on that. There's more scrutiny when it comes to lease extensions, or lease suspensions, excuse me. And so I just think it gives headquarters the opportunity to not just ask questions, but potentially hold that up. So I really encourage companies to think about if they need an APD extension, if they need a lease suspension in the future, really think about documenting and justifying that. I think questions are going to be asked. And as time goes on, that does concern me into the future, as well as the, obviously, this pause on leasing. So because it was pretty clear during the campaign, was it the first or the second debate, when President Biden, then candidate Biden, said pretty much no oil on federal lands. So we were gearing up for some type of, was it going to be a leasing ban, a leasing and permitting ban? Well, the ban turned out to be just on new leasing, but as you all know, a ban on new leasing can affect existing leases because, you know, you're developing your lateral, you're putting your plan together, you realize your 2-mile lateral is going to touch a small pocket of federal lands, you're going to need a new lease for that. So that quickly